Hello everyone, this is Tom Plew from Never Center. I'm the creator, the main programmer of Pixelmash, our new pixel art editor. It's resolution independent, which is sort of its big new thing, and I'll show you what that means as we get into it. But it's a great new way to create pixel art and animations for video games or just for art or whatever you may have in mind for pixel art. It's got that great 16-bit or 8-bit look. And there's a lot of neat things you can do with it because of its resolution independence. And in this video I just want to show you a sort of a walkthrough of the entire interface and all of the layer effects, just to give a general broad overview. I'm not going to show any one thing in too much detail, but hopefully I'll just give a pretty good description of how everything works. So if you're new to it, you watch this video, you'll basically know how everything works. Even though I'm not going to be showing great art in this one, hopefully it will be useful. So, and the version I'm showing is 1.0.01, which is our first release version after the release candidate, and we plan to add new features pretty regularly and pretty quickly. So hopefully this video will actually go out of date pretty quick, and there will be some great new things coming that aren't even in this, and then maybe I'll have to make another one. So let's get started. Let me dismiss this. Let me first just give you a broad overview of the interface here. So up here are your basic tools. It's your tool panel. If you highlight over these, you can see select, transform, erase, masked brush, brush, and then the color for the current brush. Here we can toggle the pixel preview mode on and off, and I'll show you what that means. There's a resolution slider to be able to adjust the resolution of your document. This is for toggling the grid and the background color. Over here is your color chooser, and so anything where we're choosing colors, you use this color chooser here. So let's say I can change the background color. And here's our layer manager. And I'll show you how that works in more detail. And then below the layers, this one panel on the left of these two tabs is layer properties and effects, and then the right panel is to control animations. So that's kind of the basic layout of the program. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is actually I'm going to make a new document, even though we've got one open here. So if I go to File, New Project, which is mapped to Command or Control N, you can see right here already this is a little bit different from normal pixel art programs, because in addition to the width and height, I've got this scale field. So if I want to make a document that's pixelized to 64 by 64 pixels, I also get to choose independently this scale. As you can see in this description down here, this will create a document with an underlying HD resolution of 640 by 640 and the pixelized resolution set to 64 by 64. So I'm actually creating a 640 by 640 pixel document, but it will be pixelized to 1/10 of that. I'll show you how that works right now. So if you could count these grids, you would see that this is 64 by 64 pixels. And if I paint something in there, you can see it looks like normal pixelized pixel art. But if I toggle the pixel preview mode off, you can see I'm actually painting in high resolution on that 640 by 640 resolution. And that Pixelmash, what it will do is when I toggle the pixel preview mode back on, it will pixelize that. And so again, I'll use a hotkey here. This way you don't see me using it. But I can move this around, and you can see I'm moving it around in HD. I put this back on, and it's now in that lower resolution, 64 by 64. Or if I paint, I'm painting in pixels, but you can see I'm actually painting in high resolution pixels, and I can paint in the high res mode and then go back into the pixelized mode and keep hopping between those two. And I'll show you why this is useful throughout this video, but that's basically what we're doing when we go to create that new document, and I'll do another one again. So if I did say let's do 32 height by 64 width with that scale of 10, you can see the underlying one will be 640 by 320. So you can see this one I made a sort of a wider screen version of that. So let's start out by going through the tools up at the top here. It actually probably makes most sense to start on the right hand of these and work our way to the left. So over here you can see this button toggles the grid on and off. So if I'm just going to paint something in here. Let's make a circle. Circles are good. If I toggle the grid off, it's still pixelized, but it's just those grid lines are just guides. So if I'm working on a detailed pixel level, those can be handy to see exactly where the pixels will lie. But often I prefer working with it turned off. Right here, when I click this, if I use the color chooser over here, this lets me change the background color. And it's just frequently with what you're doing, it's handy to, have a background color that's the color of the sky in your video game, or maybe the grass color if it's going to be a bush or something. And so we thought it's handy to have that right there in the interface to quickly be able to change the background color. And you can see that the grid lines will automatically adjust to whatever background color you're using. So you can always see those grid lines and they just sort of auto choose their color. All right, so these two fields over here in this slider, this is where you control the pixelization level of your document. So even though we started at 64 width by 32 height, you don't actually have to stay with that resolution. So as I slide this, you can see I can increase or decrease the pixelization level. And so right now it's 34 by 17. And you can numerically enter these, and you can take it all the way up to, let me turn off the grid lines at that super high resolution. You can take it all the way up to the full resolution of that underlying HD image that we're working with. So right now, we're viewing it at 640 by 320, which is the full resolution of this underlying thing that we're painting. And you can then slide that. This can be handy for like if you want to make multiple resolutions of a single asset, or you're not exactly sure what pixelized level will look good for your thing. Just sliding this back and forth can be a handy way to just sort of preview it at different resolutions. Like I say, you can always manually enter these in so we can get back to what we started at 64 by 32. So that's those fields. These next buttons right here, this toggles the pixel preview mode on and off. So when I click on this side, it's going to that high resolution one without sliding this slider all the way over. And so this is nice when you're like, you're painting. I'm going to do some erasing and painting here. If you want to just see what it looks like in high res quickly and then go back to your pixelized thing, this will just toggle that on and off. And it's also mapped to the keyboard shortcut that /. So throughout this, I'll be toggling that on and off with / and just using the keyboard shortcut. And I'm just showing you now grid with the pixel preview on and off. And just of note, what it does when it's going into this pixel preview mode, it will look at the very center of each of these pixels, and if it's filled in with something, then it will fill it in, and if it's not, then it won't fill it in. And it will just use whatever color is right in the mathematical center of each pixel. So that's how it chooses how to pixelize, and it doesn't do partially filled ones, so it won't do any anti-aliasing, which you don't generally want in pixel art to automatically happen. So that's these buttons. Okay, moving over along here. This is where I choose the color of my paintbrush. So I've got my paintbrush. I can choose a different color. Let's use a darker red. I'll just continue working on whatever this sort of donut thing I've got here is. So with this brush, there's a few things to note. One is that when I hold down Command or Control and scroll up or down, that will change my brush radius. So that's the shortcut for just changing that radius. But also note that just scrolling without holding down any keyboard shortcuts will zoom in and out. And notice that my brush radius stays the same relative to the screen, but as I zoom in, it's much smaller relative to the document. And so this can be handy for, like, say I'm working with this sort of brush size. If I want to do something detailed, I just zoom in and my brush size is automatically sort of zoomed to that kind of detail level. And so it's kind of a handy way to manage brush sizes, we think. So that's why that's configured like that. Another thing to note with the paintbrush is that when I'm just normally painting by just clicking and dragging, if I hold Shift, it will go into erase mode. And so there's a separate erase tool over here, but you don't have to use that. You can just stay in the brush and just hold Shift, and it will just act as an eraser, and then I can paint and erase without having to change tools, just by pressing and dragging on the paint tool and then holding Shift while I'm clicking and dragging. Okay, this next one is an interesting one. This is the masked brush tool. And what this does, let me go to another darker color here, is when I'm in a layer, if there's already something painted in the layer, the masked brush tool, I'm clicking and dragging now, it will only paint over pixels that are already painted. And so you can see as I click and drag, it's only painting over things that are already painted in. Let me just undo that. So what this can be really useful for, I'm just going to use some cheats and make this all one color. So say I have a shape like this and I want to shade it in. I've painted it in its main color. Then I'll select a darker color, and then I can use this masked brush tool to just come and paint. Let me go a little bit darker than that. Come and paint, and it will stay within the lines, and I don't have to worry about going outside of the lines. And so for shading, this is really handy. And I can select a darker color, do like this. And you can see how this masked tool is useful for that. I'm just going to go back into high-res mode and see if I left any little pieces behind. Hold Shift and get that. But you can see in the high-res mode, it's doing the same thing you saw in the low-res. So that's what that tool does. Very handy. Let me turn pixelization back on. I'm going to turn this grid off. The next one, erase tool. That's basically like, I already showed that when you hold Shift with the paintbrush tool, it just erases what's there. Show it in high res, erasing, not complicated. The transform tool. This works like transform tools in other apps, basically, where my layer that I have selected, I can stretch it out wide, squash it. I can transform in both directions equally using the corners, or I can rotate it using this rotate handle. And with this resolution independent stuff, you can see I'm not losing any of the detail in that high-res thing that I've painted. And so as I transform this and move this around, and you'll see this handy in animation stuff, I'm not losing, it's non-destructive. I'm not losing any of this detail that I've painted. So when I'm making a pixelized, donut thing upside down for one frame and then moving it over here and flipping it this way for another frame, it's still got all that detail, so it will still pixelize the same, regardless of how it is, even if I make it small and then make it big again. Just note also that when I transform something, you can see there's two rectangles it's drawing. One is the bounds of the layer itself, and so this is a pixel layer, and it's the same resolution as the document, which was 640 by 320. But when I shrink it, it's keeping it high res down in here. And this is showing me the bounds of that pixel layer. So if I go to paint on it, when it's like this, you'll note as I click and drag, it can only paint to the bounds of that layer. And so that's why that extra triangle out there, or sorry, rectangle out there is drawn to let you know what those bounds are. And there's ways to reset that so that you can make it small and then be able to paint in the same layer over here, and I'll show that to you a little bit later. And then, so that's the transform tool, and then this selection tool is just, so I'm going to duplicate this layer here so we have two layers. The selection tool just makes it so that I can click on a layer and it will select it just for when I'm working with layer effects or things. It's just an easy way to do it without having to come over to the layer editor. So I think that's the basics of all those tools at the top there. Let's now actually look more at the layer editor over here. And let me just get rid of these layers that we have in here. I'm going to turn back on the grid lines for a while. So this is the layer editor, and it's pretty standard for a graphics program. Let me put two layers in here. I'm going to label these layer, well, let's label them with what I'm going to draw them. Let's draw a cross in one. So let me paint just like this. Let me turn the pixelization back on. I want to do a better one than that. Okay. And then let's make a layer that's a circle. And we'll paint that in blue. Paint it like this there. Okay, so we've got these two layers. Now you'll notice when I click on a layer in the layer editor, if I hold it down, it will display only that layer. And this can be sort of a convenient way to see where your layer is and what it is. So if I click on the circle and hold it down, it'll highlight that's my circle layer. And so that's why you'll see them blink on and off. Now you'll notice there's also a master layer, and the reason that we have that is when you do layers, you can add effects using layer effects down here. So whichever layer I have selected here, this layer panel will refer to that layer. And so let me just show you. I'll add a quick effect here, say an outline effect. When I add it to the master layer, you can see as I click on cross, that outline effect goes away because this is, again, updating to whatever layer I have selected here. Whatever effects I add to the master layer, it will apply to all of the layers beneath it, or that are children of it. And you can see as I move around elements in this, like I move around the little cross or the circle, that outline is updated in real time and is applied to it as a whole. So it's not drawing the black outline around each of these layers individually, it's drawing around them as if they were a layer altogether because they're both children of this master layer. So that master layer you can use to add effects to your whole thing. What you can also do is you can parent these layers. So if I make the circle, if I drag it up here so that it's a child of the cross, now when I add an effect to this cross layer, again, let's do an outline. You can see it's doing the same thing because the circle is a child of the cross. Therefore, all of the effects that are applied to the cross will apply to the circle. One thing that you'll note also is that children layers in Pixelmash are drawn on top of their parent layers. And so if I make the cross a child of the circle, now the cross is drawn on top of the circle, but if I select the circle layer and move it, they both move together because the cross is a child of the circle. And another thing that you'll also notice, the cross was the layer that had this outline effect applied to it. And when it was the parent layer, it applies it to its child. So now this circle has the outline applied to it also. But when I move it so that the cross is the child of the circle, now its outline is only applied to the cross. Yeah, so that's the basics of those. So now again, you can drag and reorder and parent these just like you would in other graphics programs. We've got these buttons down here, which they're to delete a layer. I can undo that, or to create a new layer, or this one right here is to duplicate a layer. So let's get the cross selected. When I duplicate the layer, now I've got another cross, and I can drag it around, and you'll see it also when it duplicates, it inherits the layer effects from the layer that I started with. And then I can do all the things to this, like transform it or whatever. But this is now its own independent layer. And so, if I make changes to this original layer by painting in it, let me just sample this. Whoops, I keep pushing the wrong button. I'll just sample its color. It's not going to make those changes to the layer I duplicated. It's its independent own thing. So, excuse me. So I think those are the basics of this layer window. Now let me show you about the color palette. The color chooser and the palette are part of this all up here. You saw me using the color chooser. It's just your standard color chooser. Choose the hue using this slider down here, and then adjust the saturation and value up here. And with these, you can either click and drag on these indicators, or if you've got a scroll wheel or trackpad, you can just do a nice scroll motion to dial in nice values. You can enter in numerically up here, and this is your color picker. So you click on this, and then you can hover over anything in the interface actually, but I can click here and it will choose that color. And the shortcut key for that, by the way, is C. So if I am over here and I press C, then it will pull up that color chooser and I can instantly choose a color up there. Now with the color palettes, let's say I want to use these colors I already have in my scene. So I chose that with the color dropper thing. In this tools, you can there's add current color to palette, which is currently mapped to the tilde key. You can see when I do that, it'll pop up a little palette here, and I've added that color to it. And then let me use the dropper to select this other color I have in my scene. I'm going to hit tilde, and that will add that to the color palette. And so with these colors in the color palette, and maybe like maybe I'd want to make a few different shades of this red, and so I drag another color, hit tilde, drag another color, hit tilde. Now I've got 3 variants of red, and I can drag and rearrange these so that I can make these from light to dark. So then, like, with this cross, if I use this masked painting tool, I could paint highlights and choose the darker color and paint in, oh, it's already the darker color, this medium color, and paint in midtones, and the darker color for shadows. And one thing to note is that I can also just go between these colors in the palette by pressing the up and down keys on my keyboard. So it's really easy if I've got a palette that's going from light to dark. I don't have to click up there to choose it. I can just press down and up on my keyboard to quickly go between those colors, and it makes it really easy to navigate that. Now often you'll want to create gradients like these, and I did this manually by just selecting those colors and then adding them to the palette. Let me right click to delete some of these, and I'll show you how to automatically create a gradient. So when I've got a palette and I've got, say, 2 colors in it, and so these just happen to be those 2 colors I had started with in this scene. If I shift select both of them and then right click, I can choose create gradient. And then here I choose how many steps I want to have in my gradient. And this will be the total number of steps. So if I choose 5 here, then I hit OK. Now I've got 5 colors in my palette. and they all go between those first two colors. And so it's a smooth transition from that red to that blue. And so let me just, let's paint in the circle here. And I'll start with this blue, which is what it already was. I'm just going to hit up to go to the next one, up to go to the next one, up to go to the next one, and up to go to the next one. You can see that that's created a mathematically perfect gradient from the one color to the next. And just to show a different example of it, let's add white to this palette, and I'll drag the white over here to the end, and let's create a gradient between that blue and that white. So I shift select both of them, create gradient, and let's do this one with, let's do 5, no, let's do different 7 steps. I could create gradient, you'll see it just added it to the palette that was already there, but then I've got these nice different colors in the palette that are that perfect gradient from the 2 selected colors. And if I want to clear the palette, I can come up here and go clear color palette, and that will clear it. Before I do that, you can see there's also import and export color palette. So you can save those separately from your files. So if you've got a favorite color palette, you can save that as its own file and then load it in whenever you're starting a file or working on another file. If you've got a color palette that, you know, particularly emulates some old game system or something like that, that can be handy for that. Okay, now let's jump down to the layer tab down here, and this is where a lot of the magic in Pixelmash happens. And I showed this a little bit when I added an outline on this layer, but let's go through each of the layer effects and these basic things. So you can see, like with this circle layer, let me go off the transform tool. Before I've added any effect, there's a couple of things I control. One is opacity, which, as you can see, that makes it's pretty straightforward. It's just you can make a layer a certain amount transparent, and if I position it over this other layer, you'll see it just would blend as you would suspect. And then there's also this mask to parent. And actually, to show this, I'm going to do a new document. Save. We'll just make a new one at the same resolution. This mask to parent, I'll show this example with a cloud is what I'll do. So I'm going to start with a layer and just do like sort of a kind of a basic cloud shape. Let me go into high res mode here. And actually I'm going to up the resolution on this a little bit. Looks good. Okay. So I've drawn this medium gray cloud, and let me just label this layer cloud. And then let me add a new layer. I'm going to call this highlights. And I'm going to parent it to the cloud. So this is a child layer of cloud. And I'm going to paint some highlights on this cloud, and I'm going to paint them white. Now if I just start painting, you'll see it's not staying within the bounds of the cloud. It's just this new layer painting on top of the cloud. Because children, as I said before, they draw on top of their parent layers. But if I select this mask to parent, then this layer is still, it's everything I painted, and I can move it around, but it will only display where there are already pixels in the parent layer. So if I turn it on and off, you can see that. And so it's similar to this masked painting tool, except for you can maintain separate layers for your different colors or things. And so this is handy, like, well, for example, when I'm painting clouds, if I want to do these highlights and do something like this, and maybe some in here, it can be useful to have this on your own layer. So for one thing, I can adjust the opacity in it, like, you know, adjust the brightness of those highlights basically. And also sometimes it can be handy to be able to move it around or just more non-destructively adjust things like that. And I could add another layer that was like shadows, and maybe I paint it in black and do it down here. And again, before I've masked it, it just shows like that, but I click mask to parent, and then I can turn down its opacity, and then I could go in and, you know, paint on it more, and it will always stay within the bounds of that. Let me change the background color here so you can see this better. So that's what that mask to parent and opacity, and those are present on every layer. And the layer effects are sort of different from those. Okay, let's now go through each of the layer effects, which you can add to layers by clicking on this Add Effect button. To do this first one, let me just open this is a heart that I drew just in a vector editing program, because Pixel Mash doesn't yet include its own vector tools, but that's something that we hope to add before too long. But frequently you may want to, you know, for something like a heart, just go draw it really quickly in a vector program and then open it up in Pixel Mash. And so if I switch back to pixelized mode, this is what it looks like. Now you can see, like, for example, right here, because the vector program did anti-aliasing, there are parts where it's actually not either filled in fully or transparent fully, and frequently you don't want that in your pixel art stuff. So the first effect is disable partial alpha, and when I apply that, it will just, anything that's less than 50% alpha in an image, it will make fully transparent, and anything that is greater than 50% alpha or transparent, it will make completely filled in. And so that's mainly handy for when you're importing something that may have anti-aliasing or something like that. Since Pixel Mash's painting tools currently, they always paint in either full alpha or no alpha. So that's disable partial alpha. The next effect is dither. I'm just going to make a new one. Whoops. I'm going to make a new file for this. So with dither, so my normal painting, let's paint in, I'm going to put the background back to gray, and let's paint in orange color. Whoops, changing the background still. Background color, paint in orange. Okay, so I'm on a layer, make my brush big, I paint like this. Now when I add the dither effect, it dithers it. Let me turn off the grid so you can see that. And there's some pre-made dither patterns here. Again, this is non-destructive, so if I toggle back to the original high-res, that's what it looks like. So I can change the dithering at any point. And there's also a random dithering. One thing that we hope to add before too long is a custom dither pattern where you can just import an image that has whatever dithering pattern you like, and then it will automatically apply that. But you can see as I move this around, or do whatever, that it maintains that dither. And one way that this can be useful is, say that on this layer I have no effects, but then maybe I add a child layer to that maybe is, maybe we'll paint it with a darker color. I'm going to mask it to parent. So I'm painting in a new layer here that is masked to that layer. And then if I add the dithering effect here, you can see it adds it just like it's like a shadow, and maybe I could do multiple layers and do another layer where it's like a fully filled in one to sort of go between that. But then it's nice to have these all sort of non-destructive, and so I can go back and edit that dither pattern or move it around or whatever. Can be more adjustable after the fact, easier than when you're hand painting that kind of stuff. Okay, so our next effect, let me delete these. Next effect, I'll just keep working with this, is noise. And that is, it's this list of colors, and as I drag this slider, it will make more noise or less noise. And so if I add another color, let's say I set this color to white, you can see my color list now has black and white, and as I dial this up, it will just increase it until it becomes 50% black, 50% white randomly, or down like this. And one thing that you might want to do with this is just make these colors pretty similar to the color you're starting with, so maybe make one of them slightly darker and make one of them slightly lighter. And then as I dial in this noise, it's just giving more of a natural texture to that. And again, if I toggle back to the original, you can see this is all I have painted, but with the layer effects, I've got this nice adjustable noise pattern in there. All right, the next effect, color key. I'm going to open an existing image for this. The color key is generally, again, for when you're importing images. And here's a photo I took while I was at the Ghibli Museum in Tokyo. And this can be useful for when you want to basically erase a whole color in an image. So maybe there's a background or something. And so it will erase whatever colors I have in my list right here. So like I'll select this sort of gray color in the cloud, and then dial up the tolerance. Oh, I forgot to turn on the pixelization. These all only apply when it's pixelized. You can see as I dial that up, the tolerance, it edits out all the colors that are similar to that. And I can add multiple colors into this list, so I can add this sky blue, and then it will sort of work with both of those to sort of get it as much as I can down to the exact pixels that I want. So again, the color key one, that's mainly for when you're working with existing artwork that you want to like get rid of a background or something. Auto gradation also is an existing artwork kind of effect. So what that will do is it will take whatever artwork you have and you choose the two colors. So maybe I want it to be gradation from red to, I mean, I can do whatever, to green. And then it will automatically go through the image, and if I have it at its lowest level, it will just do red and green. But it will sort of use brightness levels to determine, okay, I'll divide the image into, this is probably, I think the max is 32 or something, and this is 16. We should probably put a number that's actually displaying how many colors it is here. But it will divide the image into that many brightness levels and then map it to these. So let me do something that makes a little bit more sense, from like, you do a dark red to a light green. And then you can adjust this slider, and again, I can always come up and change the resolution up here. And you can do some pretty cool things with photos or drawings or whatever to help. Often it's just a starting point. Maybe I'd want to do this and maybe delete the background with that color key. Let me just show you stacking these effects. So if I put the color key here, let me turn that off. I'm going to select those sky colors again to edit out the background. Dial up the tolerance till it's about right, and then turn back on that auto gradation. And you can see that sort of, again, this can be a starting point where then I can bake this in basically and go in and hand edit these pixels and get exactly the look that I'm going for. So that's color key and auto gradation. Auto shade is actually not for photos. So let's do a new document here. Don't save. Okay. Auto shade. Let me just draw. I'm going to paint like a bouncy ball. And let's just do it like this. There's a bouncy ball. Turn off the grid, up the resolution a little bit. What auto shade does is it automatically adds shading to a thing as if it were, there are two different styles. So this one is rounded, and let me just paint a little bit more on this so you can see what happens if this is a non-ball shape. But it's sort of, it basically lets you move the lighting source, and you can treat this as if it were sort of a rounded object. And if I choose this directional style, it will just shade it using these whatever shades I have in here. and according to this angle that I put here. So I sort of hand waved over that. But with these colors in this list, these are they're modifying the existing color of what's in here. So if I toggle this off, that was my existing color. So you can see in this list, I've got it starts with 3 going from darkest to lightest. If I made this all black, then it would make the shaded region black. But anything darker than 50% will start darkening it, and anything lighter than 50% will start lightening it all the way up to white. So if I go back to rounded, this will work, this rounded one especially, it works better on some shapes than others. It's not going to automatically make everything look perfect, but it can be either a starting point, or for simple shapes, it can work quite well on a lot of simple shapes. And at different resolutions, especially at low resolutions, it will often look really good. One other thing that I want to mention about that is just that, like, I can add more shades to this by clicking this plus button and then, dragging a lighter shade and adjust the number of gradations. But also, one sort of little trick is, let me get rid of this. So if I want like this medium color to take up more space, I can just duplicate it by selecting it here and clicking plus. And then I've got 3 of these, so it's basically saying for every, 3 of these medium colors, proportionally do these other ones. So that's why, it'll take up more space there in the shading. Hopefully that made sense. Kind of makes sense. Anyway, play around with it. And I can, let's make this dark, a little bit darker. If I want to make more of the shading taken up by the darker shade, I'll duplicate that color. So anyway, that's a way to sort of adjust how wide each band of shading is in this. And play with it and see if you find it useful for something. And if you don't, then just do your shading by hand or use this as a starting point. All right. Auto color. Now I'm going to go back and open up that photo again, because this auto color one is also for basically mostly useful when you are working with a photo. So what autocolor does is it attempts to look at your whole layer, all the colors that are in it, and restrict it to however many colors represented by this slider. So as I dial this up, it's allowing more colors to be in there. And so you can see at some of these it does quite good. So again, it's not showing the number of colors, but I think it's 32 maximum and 1 minimum. As I dial this up, it's just algorithmically doing its best to say, okay, I'm only allowed to have like 6 colors in here or whatever. It goes through the image and looks for the sort of 6 most common medium colors and then maps things to that. And you can see as I adjust the resolution, it will choose different colors based on what's in there. So that's one that you have to, sometimes it will work magic and sometimes it won't. But it's again, if I pair this with the color key like I did before, I'm going to turn this off and key out the sky like this. Dial that up. Okay, so if I key all that out and then turn on this auto color, you can see it's still getting a little bit of sky that's not totally keyed out in there, but it can be, again, a good starting point to have this robot thing, and it'll choose the colors for you, and can be handy in certain situations. All right, the next one is remap color. So that can be either used on a photo or on a drawing. Let's just do a drawing. Oops. Okay. So say I've painted something, and say I've maybe it's all in one layer, so it's not super editable and it has a few colors. So maybe I've got some kind of thing like this. It's very beautiful. But say I decided after I painted this that when I paint something dumb, actually, I just put on an outline and then it looks more pixel arty. But say I have something like this and I decide that this highlight color I want to be different, but it's all painted in one layer, so it's not easy to just go in and repaint that. And maybe we can add tools for that later. But right now, one thing we have is this layer effect to remap color. And I'm going to put it up here. What it does is it's just got two colors, and you're choosing the color that you want to map it from and to. So so this will basically say, that's why when this was below, it changed that outline from black to white, because it was remapping anything that was black to be white. If I toggle it on and off, you can see that. So when I dragged it above the outline, it's being applied before that outline is applied, and there are no black pixels in it. So I need to choose the color I want to remap from. So I use my color chooser and choose, say, this highlight color. And then whatever I change this second color to, it will remap it to that color. And so that can be handy if you've got maybe a complex painting and you're like, okay, I've used this color throughout the painting and I want to remap it everywhere to this one other color. You can do this and do that dynamically, and then find the perfect color for it. And you can bake that in later if you want to commit to that. But that's what that effect does. Okay, whoops. Restrict color palette. So let's go back to the same image right here. So this can be handy both for photos and for paintings, this restrict color palette. I've used it in several places, but it's basically it's if you want to choose the colors yourself that an image is limited to. So the tolerance is really low right now. As I turn up the tolerance, it's black is the only color I've got in the list right there. And so as I turn up the tolerance, it's finding pixels that are close to black and forcing them to be black. But say with this guy right here, maybe I know that I want like a cloudy sky color, and I want one of the colors allowed to be the more blue sky color. And then maybe for the robot guy himself, I want a dark color and a more medium color there, and then a lighter color right there. Okay, and so as I go back into pixelize mode, as I turn this up, it's going through each of the pixels and saying, okay, which of the colors in this color palette is that closest to, and it's forcing it to choose one of them. And as I dial it down, the tolerance sort of tells it, do I want to force everything to be one of those colors, or does it have to be, they have to be pretty close already? And when I click this mask unmatched colors, it will just do transparent for any color that's not matched. But you can see this is actually a pretty reliable way to convert photos into something that looks pretty neat. And so maybe I look at this and I see, okay, I like this, but I want, a color that's more between the blue and the white in the sky to be sort of an in-between color. So maybe I'd come over here, add another color in, and maybe go back to the original image and sample that color. And I come back on here. You can see, and as I adjust it also up here, you can see how it sort of, you can manually find the values that you want that make it look cool. Anyway, you may have to play with that to really get a feel for it, but it's a pretty powerful layer effect for, like I say, either converting photos or on existing artwork if you want to if you've already painted some pixel art but you want to remap colors or do a color variant of something, it can do some pretty cool things. Okay, so let's go back to a new one for this. Sorry, I keep going back and forth between photos and drawings. Again, I'll just paint some rando thing, more squiggles. Okay, the next effect is colorize. So when I colorize a layer, it's basically taking what's there and recoloring it. So that will just apply to the whole layer. And so with this layer, I've painted it all one color. Let me show you what it looks like if I paint it multiple colors. So maybe this is like, you know, some sort of shaded squiggly thing. And then I turn on this colorize effect. You can see it's still respecting the difference in lightness of those, but it's making them all be this hue basically. And so this is a handy tool for color variance of something, where if you've got something that's, you know, like a diamond that's all blue and you want to make a red version, you can just use this layer effect. And let me go back to, I'm going to paint one more color level in here. Let's use darker one. Just do this. And then turn the pixelization back on. There you can see, now I can make everything be colorized to this color that I choose in here and keep my gradations of light and dark. So that's colorize. Outline, we've done a little bit of that. It's pretty self-explanatory, but there's actually some neat options with it. This is a list where I can add as many colors as I want, so I can make it, you know, multiple layers of outline. And it's nice because it will stay, as I scale this, it's staying 1 pixel wide regardless of what scale this is set to or what resolution I put this at. And so, you know, very frequently it's a 1 pixel outline that you want, so that could be handy. And there are different options. So there's the full, which, as you can see, it's like these corner pixels. When I do smooth, it doesn't include those. It doesn't fill out all those corner areas, but full does. And then with when I go to interior tint, that one stays within the bounds of the original layer pixels, and it will just fill in 1 pixel towards the inside. And as tint implies, it's going to tint whatever color is already there. So as I do grays or lights, you can see, so I do it a little bit darker. Down here, it's doing a darker outline than it is up here because the underlying color down here is this darker color versus that lighter color. And so this is just tinting it, and that can give you a nice effect in many instances. If I do interior color, then whatever color I choose here, it will just do straight up that color, but still stay within the bounds of the underlying pixelized image there. All right, so outline, you know, you'll use that all the time. And the last effect, okay, the last one is mirror. And mirror has some pretty neat attributes. Let's do it with, we'll use this same shape. So if I add mirror, mirror has several options. So document left, you can see it's taking this layer. If I turn this effect off, it's just taking the left half of the document and mirroring it over to the right on this layer. And so as I move this around, you can see that it's updating in real time. And this is if you want to, you know, paint some sort of butterfly or something, it will always keep the layer mirrored. And oops, I didn't change the color like I thought I did. It can be, you know, handy for that. And it's not destructive. So again, if I go back into non-pixelized mode, you can see this is what I painted. But then if I go turn the pixelization back on, it looks like that. And then turn the layer effect that mirrors it on, and it looks like that. And then I can do my layer transforms, and it will stay mirrored. And you know, when you combine that with something like an outline and resolution adjustments, you can see it can be really quick to make neat stuff like, you know, different bugs or airplanes or whatever. So let me just show you now the, so we've got document left, document right, which will mirror from the right to the left. top and bottom. Document top left it's basically taking whatever's in the top left and then reflecting it both horizontally and vertically, kind of kaleidoscopy. But that can be handy for making, things that are symmetrical in both directions. And this layer left, this is mirroring it on the axis of the layer itself. So you can see that this layer is, if I turn the effect off, this layer looks like this. It's just taking this layer and mirroring it based on the layer itself. And so, and it's specifically the painted, or I guess it's using the whole layer, sorry, not just the painted area. But anyway, this makes it so that you can have symmetrical things that are symmetrical to themselves, but can be moved around within your document. And so anyway, at different angles, it may not be exactly pixel symmetrical. It depends on what angle you use, but it will largely keep it symmetrical the best that it can with the constraints. But anyway, it's the same layer top, layer bottom, and layer top left to do this sort of bilaterally symmetrical version. So I think that's all the layer effects. Okay, so the final part of the Pixel Mesh interface to show you is the animation tab. It's down here by layer, the layer tab. And to do this, I'm just going to start with this basic layer. I've painted just a circle in it. Actually, let's add a few layer effects. Let's do the auto shade and an outline, just to give this sort of a ball with a shadow on it. Maybe actually I'm going to expand the middle part of this so that it's just got a little highlight there. All right, so there's our bouncy ball. And in the animation tab, first of all, you can see we can determine what we're animating here by this drop down. We've got transforms only, visibility only, and transforms plus visibility. And I'll show you how each of those work right here. So right now our scene only has one frame in it, and they all start with that. So let's click to add a second frame. Now when it's on transforms only, that's when I can use this transform tool, and I can say, okay, in frame 1 I want this ball to be here. In frame 2 it's going to be up here where it had started before, and then maybe at frame 3 I move it up a little bit further. So now I've got frame 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and so with transforms only, it's just saying, okay, anytime I change a layer's transforms on a frame, then I'm going to key that for the animation, add a keyframe for that for the animation, and remember that. Now with transforms, well, let me show you. Okay, so let's say I'm going to duplicate this layer. So let's say we've got red ball, and then let's do blue ball. And so this ball is currently red, but let's go back to the layer, add effect, colorize, and let's colorize it to blue. Okay, and I'm going to make it smaller just so we can have these two. Okay, now going back to animation, I did all those changes in frame 3. And so you can see the transforms, it was, when I was changing them in frame 3, it wasn't changing them in frame 2 and frame 1. And let's get rid of these other frames to see how we do this with visibility. So the idea is that right now, let's put it rather on visibility only. So now when I move things around, if I add a couple layers, let's say we have, or frames, let's say we have 2 frames here. As I'm moving things around, it's applying that to all the frames basically. So when I go to frame 2 or frame 3, it's it's remembering when I move it in frame 1, since it's not animating transformations, it's only animating visibility as I go between these frames, it's keeping that. But what it will remember between frames is visibility. So say on frame 1, I've got them both visible. Frame 2, maybe I only have the red ball visible. And then frame 3, I only have the blue ball visible. And now as I go through this, you can see it's animating that visibility. And you can see this play pause button down here. When I play this, it just starts playing my animation. And with this visibility only animation, that's when, if you want to sort of hand paint each frame, then you would just do a string of frames and then have one frame, or a string of frames in your layers, then have one layer visible for each frame of the animation. So that's how the visibility one works. And so it doesn't really make sense with these bouncy balls. With transforms and visibility, it will remember both visibility and transforms between frames. So maybe let's make everything visible on every frame. So maybe on the first frame, they're both right there. On the second frame, let's move each of them a little bit. So first frame, second frame, then the third frame, we'll make the blue one disappear. Frame 1, frame 2, frame 3. Hit play. It's a very exciting animation. And I can change the duration right here. So if I change this to 3 seconds, then when I hit play, it will animate much slower. But let's show something a little bit more interesting for these animations. So let me pause this. Let me delete these extra frames. And let's use just the red one. Let's make this ball bounce. So maybe for frame 0, let's put it right here. Frame 0 will be an in-between. Frame 1 will be up here. But I want that to be the height of its bounce. So frame 3, I actually want it to be back down here. I want it to be the same as frame 1, and it's not quite there. One thing you can do is I can come up to Edit, I can copy animation frame while I have frame 1 selected, and go to frame 3 and paste animation frame, and then it will be the exact same transform position. So 1 and 3 are now exactly the same. So I've got 1, 2, 3, and then this will be the one where it bounces down here, and let's squash it like this. Let's squash it more. There we go. So now I can animate this. Oh, let's make it go faster. Let's make this a 1 second animation. Animate this, and it's using those transforms and applying all those layer effects. And if I go back into these layer effects, I can move this shading around, or even adjust the levels or the colors of the shading. I can come in here and change the outline color. You get the idea. I can colorize it to be a different color. All this while it's animating, and since it's non-destructively doing it, if I turn off the layer effects, you can see this is the high resolution image being animated with those layer transforms. But you can see how this non-destructive workflow can make a lot of things easier. And again, it may just be a starting point for you, and then you can go in and hand tweak things to make them look exactly how you want. Just one other thing in this animation menu, the shortcuts, you can hit spacebar to play or pause it. You can also, left and right will go between these frames, so I don't have to click on them. I can just manually, or I can just hit the keyboard shortcuts left and right. There's also this onion skin, which will show the frame before and the frame after, and so that can help you position things how you want, and you can see in this sort of ghosted mode what the next and previous frames look like. So that's the animation tab. So now say I've got my artwork, in this case it's an animation, but this will basically apply without an animation. Let's show the exporting. So I come up to export image, Command E, and here are our options. One is an animated GIF, and that's one of the most fun ones if you've got multiple frames. Here we choose again our frame width and frame height, but also the scale. So if I exported this at 1:1, it would export a 64 by 64 image. And let's just do that bouncy ball small. And then if I come over here, you can see that it's exported it where 1 pixel equals 1 pixel as an animated GIF with transparency. If I export it at a pixel scale of 10, then it will make a 640 by 640 animated GIF. Let's call that bouncy ball big. You can see that it's doing 10 pixels for every 1 pixel in that source image. Now, you can see there are other options here. There's PNG, TIFF, and JPEG. Each of them have a sprite sheet option and a regular option. So if I did just PNG, that would just export whatever the current frame is. So that's like single frame, I'll call that. And you can see that this is a PNG, and it's just whatever frame I'm currently on. And if I do the sprite sheet option, then let's make the pixel scale a little bit smaller. Then it will collate all, whoops, I'm calling it single frame. Let's call it sprite sheet. Sprite sheet. Then it will automatically take all of those frames of the animation and collate them into a single sprite sheet. So that can be handy for your game engine or whatever. And just going up through menu items, let me just see what else is worth mentioning here. Import image is for when you want to bring in just any image into your existing project rather than opening as its own project. In the edit menu, this copy and paste stuff is handy. I mean, you can copy and paste whole layers. You can also just copy and paste layer effects. So like this, this ball layer, again, without its effects, without its auto shade and its outline and its colorize, it looks like that. But so say I make a new layer, I'll just call it rando, and I just paint some random stuff on here. If I copy this green ball layer with Command C and then Command Shift V to paste its layer effects, you can see that it's just pasted that the styling of the green and the shadow and the outline. So that can be handy for many things. You can also copy and paste animation frames. Resize project is a handy one. So, you know, say I've got my project this way. You can see that it's 64 by 64 pixels, but maybe I want to like expand it out on the sides. I can go up to resize project and let's say make it 128 or 128 width. So I want 64 height and 128 width. And it just expands the canvas basically. And then I've got all this additional area to work with. And so you're not stuck with what you start with for that. Bake resolution and effects. So here's where if you've painted something and, you know, if I toggle back to high res mode, I can see I've got, you know, this high resolution, but it's also the wrong colors. I'm using all these layer effects to do this. When I do bake resolution or bake resolution and effects, so let's just do bake resolution first. So that it doesn't work if you have animation frames, by the way. That's what this pop-up is saying. But it's baking it, so now the high res layer is this this resolution that we were working with. And so that basically bakes it all in. So now it's just that resolution. And so now I can work pixel by pixel like I would in a normal pixel art program. I'm going to undo that. There we go. And if I do bake resolution and effects, then it's baking both the resolution and the layer effect. So now you can see both of these layers, oops, accidentally parented them, they no longer have layer effects applied. So it's baked all of that in. So now these are just the actual pixels, and that's actual color that they're painted. And I can come in and just do my, regular normal style, like, okay, I'm just going to do pixel editing like in a normal pixel art program and just paint in pixels and choose colors and go pixel by pixel. So if you want to use any of these things as a starting point rather than relying on this whole conceit of the high res, low res thing, then that baking resolution and effects will be very handy for you. Let me undo that and go to bake layer transform, because that one is of use. Okay, so I undid this. So now we have the high res again. But you can see, so like with this layer, since we started painting this layer before we made the project wide, you can see the layer bounds only go this far. And so if I'm painting in this layer, and it's going to look, I'm going to paint with red, but it will still look green because of the layer effects. It runs out of space. I can't paint over here because the layer itself only runs to those bounds. So if I undo that, what I can do is I can choose this layer and I can say, okay, bake layer transform. And what that will do is it will basically redraw the layer, but it will redraw it so that its bounds go to the full document bounds. So now I can paint in this layer and it's going to the full bounds of that document. So that's a handy thing. Okay, going back up through these, we went through the tools, we went through the color palette stuff. These view things are pretty self-explanatory. We talked about toggling pixel preview, where if I hit slash, it goes to that high res view without any of the layer effects applied. Zoom to 100%, that will do, whatever my pixelization level is set to currently, it will map that 1:1, so I can see that's what it looks like at 1 pixel. But you can see if I change the resolution of this and then go to 100%, it'll be a different size to match that new resolution that I dialed in. So these can be handy keyboard shortcuts to just sort of see, okay, what does it look like at that, and fully zoomed into the screen. So those are handy. Tiling. Let's actually make a new image for tiling. Let's make it 32 by 32. This is actually a very handy and important feature. So with tiling, say I've just painted something in a layer. Let's again make it pretty basic. X, add an outline. With tiling, I come into view, I turn on tile horizontal, then it will just draw. I can zoom out however far I want, and it will draw this tiled horizontally. And view tile vertical, I can turn them on separately. Now it's doing both of them. And so, like, say I want to, draw a repeating pattern. You can see how this is handy for, like, okay, I can have tiling turned on and make these line up properly how I'd want them to line up when it's tiled. And I'm missing there. But yeah, so that lets you sort of do that live, and then you can see how that looks and change your layer effects or whatever, or paint your other colors and make it crazy. But that tiling view option lets you do that in real time and just sort of see what it will look like when it's tiled. And we've got animation. We talked about all that stuff. This help stuff, this is the last part I'll talk about. These are all parts on our website. This how-to website, this is just a shortcut. I think right now it's just going to our YouTube channel that has these videos on it. But we may update that in the future, just so where you can go to see how things work, like this video. Sample files, that will just go to a place on our website where you can download sample files to play with. And the send feedback will go to a spot on our website that will give you an email address or a form to give us any feedback. So that is the big rundown of Pixelmash. Hope I didn't go over anything too quickly or too slowly. It's a lot to fit in, but I wanted to make it all in one video. And we're going to keep adding stuff. So let us know. Use that send feedback in the help thing to let us know what you'd like to see, because like with these layer effects, we can add a bunch more of these, and there will be a million handy things to put in. And things, like I said, like vector tools that we would love to put in. It's just with this format of the resolution independence, it opens up a whole lot of new opportunities, and we're only scratching the surface. So thanks. We hope you love Pixelmash as much as we do.